Good day, everyone. We're now right at the top of the hour and ready to begin our Q&A session. As a follow-up to last week's webinar, our topic last week was developing stakeholder partnerships internally and externally for successful grants. Today's March 29th, 2017. This webinar today is being recorded, and we'll forward that recording link to you for future reference. Let me tell you a little bit about the logistics for today's event. For this webinar, this Q&A session, you can ask questions via the question window on the lower right of your screen, or you can raise your hand, and then I'll open up your line, your audio line, whether it's telephone or voice over IP, and then you can ask your questions of our presenters. Don't hesitate to do that. It's a lot of fun to hear different voices coming on the scene. Well, how does this raising your hand business work? Many of you know, but if you look at this screen, there's a stack of icons toward the upper right of your control panel of your screen. The last one down is a little hand. So if you click on it, that will cause your hand to raise. And if I'm paying attention, hopefully I'm paying attention, I'll see that hand raise, and then I'll be able to call on you. I'll invite you. I'll say, now your audio line is open. Max, your audio line is open, or whoever it might be, and then you can forward your question to one of our presenters. So easy enough, a couple of options. We know from our prior Q&A sessions that members of our audience often gain not only from their own question, but hearing the interaction between our presenters. So we're going to be using that same approach today. Let me introduce our presenters. Excuse me. Let's go ahead to the next slide. You remember from last week, those of you who attended, and I think most of it did, Elaine Johnson, she was the PI, she is the PI and Executive Director of MyoLink. Welcome again today, Elaine. Would you say hi to our colleagues?
Oh, absolutely. It was such a lovely time last week when we had a chance to talk about these strategic partnerships. And I want to say that a number of people have contacted me over the last week and have come in with ideas, and there's been a lot of dynamic exchange going on after the webinar as well. So I'm really looking forward to what kind of questions we might discuss today.
Thanks, Elaine. Thank you again for joining. Also joining us is Ann Beheeler, and you're the PI and Executive Director of CTC. Welcome back, Ann. And I'm not hearing your audio. Are you unmuted? Hold on just a second, folks. We'll correct this. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Sorry, I was muted. I thought I had unmuted, but I guess I double-clicked. Anyway, bottom line is I'm really delighted to be with you today. I like the questions that we did not get to, and I too have had a few questions come in this week. So I look forward to sharing everything I know, and I look forward to learning from you and from the other presenters.
Thank you, Ann. And also joining us is Marilyn Barger, who is the PI and Executive Director at FLATE in Florida. Marilyn, do you want to come on for a moment and say hello?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm looking forward to the conversation as well.
Good. Thank you very much, Marilyn, for joining. You know, colleagues, I thought as we thought about our Q&A session today, I thought there might be some categories of which we could approach our discussion. And I based these categories around a lot of the things that happened last week. And let me tell you my idea here. Number one, we had a lot of questions about how do you engage new stakeholders? Well, that's a pretty broad question. And one of the aspects of it that I thought was interesting, is there a hierarchy? For example, do you start at the CEO or do you start with a more operational staff member and work up? That'll be an example of a type of question. We'll get into that in a few moments. Here's some that came, and I'll ask Marilyn, in addition to our other colleagues, to talk about this one. How do you structure that very first meeting with your new partner? Who sets the agenda? How do you organize follow-up? That'd be very interesting for us because that's a critical thing. Third bullet, what's the difference? Letter of support, letter of commitment, memorandums of understanding, MOUs. We'll talk a little bit about that and which one of those might be the most important. As we go through our discussion today, I'll ask each of our presenters to use specific examples as much as they can, a specific example of a partnership, of a letter, something that worked for them. And I'll also remind them that sometimes we learn a lot from things that didn't work so well. Was there a partnership that just didn't come about? What did you learn from that? Here's a question that I put in. Does a partnership always involve money? Should it always involve money or some sort of exchange of resources? And finally, tongue-in-cheek, is breaking up hard to do? If you've got a partner that hasn't really worked, should you let it wither on the vine, or should you do an official breakup? Anyhow, I thought that might be fun to talk about those things. Please remember to use the question window on your screen. I've got that open on my screen so I can see your questions. And raise your hand for the audio if you like. Let's begin today. Right back to the top of this screen, engaging new stakeholders. And you've done a lot of engaging people over the years. What's your best advice? How do you manage it? How do you treat engaging a new stakeholder? Why don't you tell us your story, Ann?
Sure, happy to do so. And I am sure there are details that I will leave out in this as we go through, and so feel free to ask additional questions as we go along. You ask if there's a hierarchy. I don't think there's a hierarchy. There are partners that are necessary at all sorts of different levels. For example, I think we talked last time that seldom is a grant just with one college, except perhaps those grants for people that are new to ATE. Typically, the institutions, there's more than one institution involved. So what I did, and I'm going to give my examples for when we started the regional center, because some of you might recall that I said that I was hired to grow IT enrollments at Collin College, just north of Dallas. Shortly after the 9/11 tragedy and just right before the dot-com bust. When I was hired, we would never ever be able to have enough IT workers to fill demand, and shortly after the dot-com bust, we had excess faculty, we had people being laid off. In the North Texas region alone, we had 70 to 100,000 people related to IT that were actually laid off. So in that situation, the problems that we were dealing with at Collin, that being that we had staffed up to be able to produce more IT graduates, and the fact that we were getting people hired right and left, all of a sudden all of that changed, and we had a problem that we had really too many faculty. And at that point in time, I don't know what your institution's requirements are, but our requirement for someone to teach IT at that point was just an associate's degree in IT or something related. And the problem with that is that faculty member probably couldn't necessarily teach something else, so that was a bit of a problem. But we were not alone. It wasn't just us. When we talk about North Texas or the DFW Metroplex, typically that includes at least 3 major college districts. That's Tarrant County, Dallas County, and Collin County, and those are adjacent counties. But at the time, in the early 2000s, these different districts were, I won't even say they were in co-opetition with one another, they were in competition with one another. If one of them did something really good, the other one copied it, but didn't really talk to the one that had had the first success. But we were all in the same boat in terms of having problems with precipitously low enrollments in our IT courses, and businesses that really didn't particularly want to talk to us much about hiring our people or buying our training or buying our education or supporting people coming to school, because they had immediate issues, and those immediate issues were, how do we retain profitability, at least in some manner, so that we can stay in business. So I reached out to the 2 adjacent county school districts and had to search around a bit for the right person to talk to, but I decided at that point who I wanted to have involved. I also thought it was probably a good idea to have a university involved, and the university that is a public university and actually was amenable to talking to us about about taking transfers from our programs was the University of North Texas, so we started working with them. So I guess targeting the institutions, pick the ones you want. Don't necessarily wait for people to come to you. And in terms of businesses, this was kind of interesting. I always start with the highest level individual with a company in a given area, and that might be the CEO owner. Maybe it's a one-person shop, or it might be a giant concern like Dell or Cisco. And nevertheless, I went for the very highest person in the area. I created a script for going after those people, and I tried to figure out from my viewpoint what would be in it. They were laying workers off. What's in it for them? In some cases, it was wanting to think about the future and wanting to hold out hope for the future that we would in fact be ready to provide right-skilled candidates for their jobs when their business came back. And that worked. Wasn't always the case that worked, but that was a major proposition with them. And then the workforce boards, of course, they had a problem on their hands, and we kept them involved. We also kept some CBOs involved. There are several that work with more disadvantaged students, and they were beneficial as well. Regardless, after targeting, make a list, a true list about which institutions, which businesses, workforce boards, CBOs, who do you want to have involved to make the proposal and the work a success? And how are you going to go about it? What are the potential, I call it the WIFMs, what's in it for me? What are the benefits for those particular target bodies? What's the benefit for them to be involved? Now, we talked about internal partners too. Internal is a little bit different because typically we're asking people within the college to do more work. And in that case, it's important to sell people on the value of the work that you're proposing to do. I would say, though, that we talked about an elevator speech. The elevator speech is basically the here's what I want to do and why I want to do it and why it matters. Remember, that's 3 or 4 sentences at most, and that's a very important thing to have in terms of selling the internal organizations on helping you to get the work done. In all, remember that grants are not gifts. They're not quite contracts, but they're close. It's possible depending on the granting agency, to change what you're doing after the fact, but it's not easy. And so it's very important that not only are the stakeholders involved for what they're going to get out of the grant, but also involved because they're willing to commit to working in the grant. And in terms of the businesses, what they committed to do was to help us prepare curriculum for the next new wave of IT when the businesses would hire again. Okay, now remember that your partners are strategic. They are targeted. Well, why do you pick one over another? Well, I have to say originally in 2003 timeframe, we picked the adjacent county districts because we were all facing the same kind of problem. But I also knew that we had many, many institutions across the U.S. facing a similar problem. In our new proposal, what we have done is pick the partners such that each has their own particular mission, their expertise, such as in one case we have a college that is very good at data visualization and business intelligence, another that's very, very good at diversity. And so each of the partners have a goal. They have work they have to do in order to be a full partner in the grant. Everyone benefits and everyone leads. I think that's a really, really important thing. And the everyone leading part is what helps the engagement. Now, with respect to businesses, it's important to have a variety of businesses, not just your trusted friends and other comfortable acquaintances, the people that have been on your business advisory council for years, but maybe those folks plus new people. before we went on, I was talking to Mike, and what I really like is to see the businesses challenge one another. What do they want in workforce-ready job candidates? They don't always agree. I guess someone told me along the way, if you've got two people and they always agree, one of them is superfluous. So it's really nice to have businesses with different missions, with different sizes, different issues. And again, we keep coming back to the vision. What is your vision, and how are you putting that in the elevator speech? And how do you know it's somewhat new, or at least new to the set of institutions you're going to work with, so that it has a chance of being funded? Then, in going after stakeholders, it's very, very important to make this a high-touch operation. If you have tried to add to your business team by sending out a mass email, I suspect it probably hasn't been terribly successful. We're buying for time from these businesses, and it's truly very beneficial to make it very high touch. We have had really good luck with phoning, and again, I said phone the highest level person within the company. Very often that's not the right person, but either that person tells you who to talk to, or that person's assistant can tell you who to talk to in order to get the appropriate people on your team. You do need to be willing to develop what each partner's role will be, or what your expectations are, with some flexibility to be willing to adapt to whatever they think is important to them. It's also important to do some follow-up. If you just leave one voice message, it's not appropriate to say, well, I left a voice message on March 10th with so-and-so of XYZ company, and they haven't called me back, so I guess they're not interested. These business people are extremely busy, and the fact that they don't see your email or don't hear your voice message is really not personal. It's just they're incredibly busy. Regardless of what you do, always be respectful of their time. Be sure to tell them what kind of time you're expecting. In our case, we meet 4 times a year. One meeting is face-to-face, and it's 4 to 6 hours. The other 3 meetings are an hour and a half, and they're done via WebEx. So we're looking for about 10 hours a year minimum, and then I have a whole list of other opportunities for people to be engaged. Also remember to name drop. I don't really like name droppers in general. However, having a National Science Foundation grant, or going for a National Science Foundation grant, or a DOL grant, or any other grant can carry some weight. Again, have a script. Be sure on that script that you have several frequent questions or objections answered, and be willing to add to that list as you work with various people. And probably the biggest advice is be ready to pivot. If you call someone and don't have the right person, be willing to ask for who should I really be talking to. And then secondly, it's very important to be willing to adapt to what they need and what they're willing to do. Again, I would say that it's important when you're calling the folks to get them involved as stakeholders to be able to talk about that initial meeting. And at that point, this I think is something we're going to have Marilyn talk about. But before we go to that, I'd like to ask if either Elaine or any of the presenters have something they'd like to add to what I've just said.
I think that you've hit many nails on the head, Anne, and remind us of some of the very critical pieces to developing these partnerships. And the strategic part, I think, is a great help to all of us as we plan how we're going to approach new partners. The idea of your strategies and the fact that you've done this and in a very structured way is really good. And to I think that when you talked about the downturn in the IT industry, I think that we can all agree that we need to match the needs of the workforce with the education that is required, and then also fit it in with the needs of the students and their ability to engage and be confident that they're going to get a job when they finish their program. Those are a few comments that I have, and Marilyn might have some more.
Well, let me address something real quickly with you. We were in a position where we were going after National Science Foundation support to figure out the next new thing originally. And in IT, that's not hard to do because the next new thing is about 30% of what you need to be doing every single year. However, it was in a way sort of nice because I wasn't asking the businesses to join our team to immediately make commitments to internships or hiring people or sending people for training. I predicted that it was going to take 2 or 3 years for the industries to come back enough to be able to be willing to hire because, again, from IT goes down, it goes down for a while, and when it comes back up differently, and I don't think that's anything different from any other industry. But figuring out what that difference is ahead of time was really a luxury because we were able to develop curriculum over a time period that was somewhat reasonable as opposed to always being behind, which is more like what we're doing currently. And it worked out very, very well to have the businesses involved, have the faculty involved, and have new curriculum ready and new graduates ready by the time the industry came back, which was more or less 2006, 7, a little bit into 8, but our first graduate was 2007, and it was very, very rewarding to realize that she had something like 8 interviews and 3 or 4 job offers within about 2 weeks or so after graduating. That was the first time that we had any real proof other than just faith that what we were doing was really working. Marilyn, what are your comments?
Hey, can you hear me, everybody?
No.
No?
No, you're very, very quiet at the end of a tunnel.
Wow. Well,
talk loudly.
That's a little better.
Okay, well, let me just say 2 things. One is just to emphasize, I think, some important facts and points that have been made. And one is being very strategic about your approach and being very deliberate about your partners and your selection of partners. And then the second point that I'd like to emphasize from what's been said so far is that you need to really be very flexible in allowing your potential partners or your partners to fill in and work with you at the places and spaces that they want to work at, the things that are important to them. That could be at the company level, at the company level, or at the individual level. So if the individual changes, that interaction might shift a little bit. And we need a lot of different kinds of interactions with colleges do with their industry partners. And so sliding one company from one bucket to another bucket is being able to do that, I think, is an important thing, just to keep the relationship going no matter where their sweet spot is for what they're really interested in.
I agree 100%, Marilyn, and it's also really, really important to make sure that you communicate regularly with these folks. Even when you're first getting them involved, when you get to a yes and you think you have the right person from within their company, it's important to kind of keep them involved in how you're putting things together. I was working with a group today that is building a BILT for the very first time, Business and Industry Leadership Team, which our process is for them to co-lead our work. And that was a little bit scary for them to co-lead the work when we weren't really sure exactly where they'd take us. But ultimately, businesses are the ones that are going to hire our graduates, so they have a stake in it. But it's very, very important. Sometimes it takes several weeks or even months to put together that very first meeting. And so it's very important to not be out of sight, out of mind with the people that have already said yes. Maybe send them a weekly update that says, here we are, here's what we're doing, here's what our plans are. We estimate that that first meeting is going to be on, I don't know, 3rd week of April, 4th week of May, whatever that might be.
I like that, and the importance of the regular communication, and particularly at the beginning when somebody's committed to something, and then there's a space of time before the actual meetings take place. So I think that that whole idea of regular communication is absolutely critical.
Well, and we also follow up at least annually and talk to the person that is on our build about what works and what doesn't. That's part of our survey. Rather than sending them a survey, hey, fill this out on SurveyMonkey, we do the high-touch approach so that values them, because frankly, it is about relationships. It is about almost dating and quasi. Marilyn, how do you prepare for that first meeting, or how do you structure that first meeting?
Okay, I guess I want to emphasize the strategic part one more time, because the strategic falls into this category as well. I think a good approach is to really do a lot of research, or some research about the potential partner, and identify, make your list of some places where you think there's good potential for partnering, where they can help you, and also, not unimportantly, where they you can help them reach their goals. Sometimes that's probably challenging to do with a new partner, because you may not know that much about the institution, the organization, the company. You might not know enough about them, and you might not know enough about the specific person you're going to interact with, or persons. There may be more than one at that initial meeting. So I think it's really important to be really clear about your own goals and objectives. And I like to think of it as like a card deck. I have all of these different things that we're engaged in as an organization. And I try to listen really carefully to them and learn from this pre-research to see where they may be best integrated into our organization and partner with them. And then, so doing the homework, setting up the meeting, spending some time at the meeting, having both or whatever number of organizations are there, giving everyone plenty of time to present what they do, tell in an informal way. This shouldn't be formalized, I don't believe. What they do, what their niche is, what their personal passions are, because that certainly plays a role. And make sure that you listen really carefully to what organizations have to say, what the players have to say. And then be ready to respond to their needs first, and see if you can find a right place for yourself, your company, your school, your organization to match what their particular needs are, and pick it up from there. So I think it's a really challenging conversation the first time. If you really want the partnership, or really think it's important for your college, or for your grant or your center, then you really need to be well prepared for the meeting with a lot of different options for the company. If you don't get the one you really wanted, then maybe it's the goal for down the road into the future. And go, I would say, go to the place where you can get somebody the first time, whatever that passion is, and then bring them in. I think we've been really successful doing that, and keeping partners for a long time, getting them more engaged as they go through, as time goes by, in different aspects of our organization. And then lastly, but not least, the follow-up part is incredibly important. I tell my center folks that it's our responsibility to reach out and communicate. The communication thing both Elaine and Anne have mentioned in response to the first meeting is really important, by email, by phone, by as many ways as you can, reiterating the commitment that you've talked about, and perhaps, hopefully, some commitments that you've actually made.
Yeah, Marilyn, I think that's really important. Also, actually, in thinking back, if I was not sure what some of the companies were in the area, because some of the smaller and medium-sized companies were less well known to me, I actually contacted, not Chamber of Commerce then, although that would work well too, but I worked with the people at the Workforce Board at the time, and I also contacted the Economic Development Corporation, also contacted some of the higher administrators, the VPs and the president, for relationships that they might already have had in the area with are notorious for, I don't know, we have to be a little careful when we work with an outside entity and outside business, because they may have been approached by 6 different people in the college that don't know the other 5 are approaching them. So that has worked. Also, when you talk about strategies or strategic mission, very important that whatever you want to do for the grant aligns with the strategic mission of the college. Extremely important. And if it doesn't, it's going to be a hard sell to get the grant approved, and even harder to get it to happen.
And I'd like to interrupt, if I could, with a couple of questions from our audience. Let me
Sure.
start with, I'll start with Marilyn, and then I'll go to Anne and Elaine for this same question. Marilyn, do you use any collaboration software that helps you, like, remind to connect with partners about pending meetings? Do you use anything to help structure the way you manage that relationship on a software side?
No, the short answer is no. Just variety of regular communications that we've structured in the processing of setting up our different organizational infrastructure. So we have processes in place that say, well, we'll send out first meeting notices if it's related to a meeting on X number of weeks before. We'll follow up with individuals if we want them to do participate in a particular way. I do that personally most of the time to make sure we kind of keep that relationship. So typically it's by email or phone call. I think Anne's
Yes.
comment about calling is important. We try to see them out in the community as often as we can as well, in different events that may not be our events, or meetings that are not ours.
That's a good point. Here at Maricopa, we've experimented with something called HubSpot, but that's largely more one of these CRMs, the customer relationship managers, and we largely use it for how to manage an inbound connection, somebody that wants to know if we do something or if we can provide something. We haven't used it so much as a relationship management tool. What about you, Anne, at Collin? Do you use anything software-wise?
Well, not even speaking about Collin, I think there's a big difference when you're building relationships and when they've already been established. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to use collaborative software now, I probably could get acceptance for that from the group. But in the beginning, this is super high touch, and as you're getting commitment for stakeholders, I don't do any of the commitment business through email, period. It's either through a printed letter that is hand-signed, put in an envelope with a hand address on it, and a real stamp on it. I just happened to do that once because I didn't have time to call everyone, and that actually worked very, very well, because think about it, how many hand-addressed envelopes with a stamp on it do you get? Not so many. You want to stand out. Email is hard. We do email all over the place now in terms of sending out save the dates and preliminary agendas and requests for involvement or opportunities for people to mentor students or be on panels or whatever. We use email for that fairly frequently now, but it's very different now because in 2003 we were putting together a group of people that really didn't know each other. And I would say that Maryland's had good luck with this, and so have we have people on our board that are still on our board, our business and industry team, since 2003. And I don't think they would be there if they weren't getting out of it what they thought was important and if they didn't feel valued. It's very, very important that it be high touch, phone calls, snail mail, email is okay for after they're committed. But again, if you don't get a response from the email, sometimes on our built meetings are quarterly, and sometimes we'll be coming up to the built meeting and we have responses from only maybe 6 businesses out of the 40 active ones that we're working with. We have about 40 that are kind of active or pretty active, but it does not mean if they haven't responded to an email, it does not mean they don't want to be there. It means they overlooked the email.
Yeah.
So it may take a phone call follow-up.
Well, good, thanks. Let me turn to Elaine. Elaine, at City College of San Francisco, do you use anything in the more formal sense to help track your relationships?
I have to say that we rely heavily on Sandra Porter, who's in Seattle, and she's the person that sets up our website, and she's also the person that likes to try new software, new methods of communication, but she has particular talent for gathering data and reporting, and we like to be able to tell our partners that we'll share that data with them so that we can provide information about jobs around the country, directions, hotspots, so to speak. You said the word HubSpot as far as a software. I'm not talking so much about the particular software, but more what we can share and how that information is gathered. So that's a little different take on this, but it seems to work really well. And we also have blogs and people sharing on a regular, we have a hard newsletter that we send out, but we also have ongoing constant blogging about what's working, what's not working, and I think that that's been a strategy that's worked well for us.
Well, good. Thanks, Elaine. Let's turn to another question from one of our colleagues, and this is to you. Right at the beginning, you mentioned that seldom is a grant with just one college. That's certainly true. But in this particular case, they're involving a single college with multiple community organizations. Do you think from a reviewer standpoint, they will look askance at the single college, but multiple organizations, only one of them is a college? Do you think that would be an issue from a review standpoint, or maybe a red flag?
Well, if I could figure out exactly what a group of panelists all think on a review, I would be probably worth $1 million an hour.
Yes.
A panel is composed of probably 4 to 6 or 8 of peer reviewers, but the peer reviewers may in fact be quite different in their perspective. I think it's a matter of making the case in the proposal for why it is important, why the work is important with this one college, and emphasizing the fact that you're working with lots of different stakeholders. I don't know, it could be compelling, but then again it might not. I know that we have had situations where the reviews have come back, one of them saying you're trying to do too much, and another one saying you're not doing enough. So I don't know what I could say about that. Typically, when there is more than one college and the roles of the colleges are clear, as well as the commitment from business is clear, then that typically bodes pretty well. But again, what a given reviewer is going to think, I don't know.
I think the point is that it's more than a single college. That you made that point clearly, but I think whether your partners involve other colleges or other institutions, that depends obviously on the project you're proposing and the case you can make for it. So I think that is probably the best answer there. Good, thank you.
This is Marilyn. I'd just like to disagree. I think it really depends. I know and work with a lot of projects that actually are just single college that are involved very deeply and trying to get more involved more deeply in their own community. Now, it's not just, and it's a variety of organizations, institutions, including their pathways, so their high school, their K-12 district, et cetera, yes. But it doesn't really involve other colleges.
Well, but if you're involving high schools, that I wasn't very articulate in that. Involving an institution other than one's own.
Right.
High school involvement, that makes a lot of sense.
Also a point of the size of the college. Some colleges have multiple campuses and are huge, others are very small. And so there's in every case, it's looking at what you've got to work with, what your industry is like around you, what are your special qualities, and to maximize those.
Good point. Let's move forward to our next category. We talked about this on the webinar last week quite a bit, but let's review some of the highlights. As you establish, now you've done your first meeting, you've structured your arrangement, how do you formalize it? I'll start with you, Ann. Do you ask for a letter of support, a letter of commitment? Do you actually create a memorandum of understanding? What's your sense of what's the best approach here, or is there a best approach?
Oh, I could just share what we do. I don't know that it's best, but it has served us well. If somebody is getting money from us, if they are one of the partners that are both producing work and receiving benefit, if they're receiving money, they're receiving what's called a subaward. That always has an MOU attached to it, a memorandum of understanding that has a statement of work that they're expected to do on a particular timeline to get the money that they'd like to have. I have not done that, though, with businesses. The businesses don't get money from us. In fact, usually it's the other way. They provide in-kind services. They've often provided equipment. And what I do ask for them when I put a proposal in, though, is a letter of commitment for what they are going to do in the future to help make the work of the grant a success. Their signing a letter of commitment is very important, and in that letter of commitment, it's not just, oh, we think what you're talking about is great and we support you and think that NSF should fund you. It's more, oh, we think it's important and here's what we're willing to do in this next grant period to make your work a success. So I think it's a mixture. MOUs are hard to do. I learned that a long time ago, especially if you're doing them with institutions in different states. The state laws are widely different, but with the businesses, we've never found the need to have an actual letter or MOU other than the letter of commitment that goes in with the proposal. And interestingly enough, the last time we submitted a proposal, our letter from our BILT team was actually signed by several of the members on the BILT, as opposed to having each one of them have a different letter. And I think that probably is a good thing to do if you already have a well-established business team.
Do you know, Ann, here at Maricopa, we use that same strategy. Our recent submission had 6 co-signers of a letter saying, in effect, we commit to the following. We, the undersigned, commit to the following. I think
Right.
it was effective, and that's the approach we're using now. So what about you, Elaine, when you submit either with your grant or for other purposes, do you use letters? Do you use memorandum? Do you use this multiple signing of the same letter? What do you think works for you, Elaine?
Well, I think that as you look at the solicitation, it's from the National Science Foundation, the partners are asked to write a letter of commitment. It's not just a letter of support. So I would say that we use a letter of commitment, and then I agree with Anne that if we have subawards, we always have a memorandum of understanding and to go through exactly what that means. But the commitment part is one that's, it's not that everybody knows how to write that. They don't know what that commitment might look like. And so there were in the questions last time, the request to say, what are some examples of commitment? And I'm prepared to address that, but I think that everyone, all of us, could give certain examples of what a commitment might look like.
Why don't we do that, Elaine, because we'd like to talk about that. Give us one example of where someone has done something that really stands out as a commitment to you.
The top of the list for our particular industry seems to be internships. And the companies are oftentimes reluctant to commit to an internship, but we have over many years now provided expectations, talked about what that might look like, who the mentor might be for a student that goes to work in a particular industry, what the outcomes will be, at the end of the internship, will there be some reporting back? We have a networking event where all our interns share what they've done, and we have expectations that the companies will support those students in some way. They will commit to having the interns work in teams, learn presentation skills, do mock interviews. So within the internship itself, there is a tremendous amount of commitment, but it's a difference than just saying, we will offer an internship. It's a real way of committing to a successful experience for both them and the students. And in our case, this is oftentimes the way students get hired permanently, because the companies like the interns so well, and they know what they can do, and they've had a chance to really interact with them. So that's one example.
That's a good one, Elaine. What about you, Marilyn? One that stands out as an example of a commitment.
Okay, well, I guess I would put at the top of our list commitment to work with students. For us, it's typically a broader statement than a particular internship. I agree with all that Elaine said, that the internship is very much like a partnership where you need to really know what the expectations are on both sides, both from the institution and the student and the company as well. So there's a lot of, and in some cases an MOU if college credit's involved in that, a lot of bulk there. But in the letter, I think stating that you're going to, work with the students, and that maybe in terms of internship, for us a lot of times, and maybe similarly for biotech, it's working on projects, mentoring students in projects, or research projects or design projects in the engineering field. I think very specifically that they'll commit some time for the organization or themselves personally, depending on the letter that you're writing, with the students. So I think the interaction with students, however it is right up there in the kind of priority list. It's a lot of time commitment on their part. The money part, I think, is not to be mentioned because we're not supposed to have that kind of commitment, I think, in those letters anymore. So some time of time commitment. I often see in a letter the letters built in 3 parts. I understand what you want to do. This is your project idea in a nutshell. This is what we do and what we need. And then here's where we are going to help you if you're funded. And that sometimes is simply put in a short bullet list. You know, we'll work with the in this case, program managers of the program directly on their curriculum. We will interact with students with internships and or student support in this other way of project and research mentoring, those kinds of things in a kind of in a short bullet list that stands out in the letter as something that they're actually going to do.
That's a good point, Marilyn. We use a similar 3-tiered structure, so sort of picking up on what you said. The partner says, this is what we understand you're going to do. Number 2, here's why we think it's good. And then number 3, here's what we will do to help you. So that's the important paragraph at the end. Elizabeth Tellis from the National Science Foundation says, avoid love letters. I thought that's a very funny term here. You know, we think this is wonderful. Well, yeah, but how about a bit more than that? So avoid the love letters. And let me turn to you. What's the highest, good example, best type of commitment? If you had to pick one, what would you say?
Well, I think commitment to work with students is very important, but again, we feel that the whole built approach and having the 4 meetings per year is essential. It's the essential foundation for what we do. It promotes engagement. It keeps us not out of sight, out of mind. It keeps us presently in mind. In the original regional proposal, we had individual letters from businesses, and that was long enough ago that it was not absolutely forbidden to have love letters. And I'm afraid probably some of ours, I love that term. I think probably some of ours were love letters at that point in time where people were saying we're going to support. Because remember, they're laying off. They couldn't say a whole lot other than they would participate with us in the built process to prepare the curriculum of the future because they were betting on the future in the industry. Now that the businesses actually have built relationships with one another, it was actually their suggestion this last time that they have a joint letter and that they list the things that they have done in the past and are prepared to do in the future to support the work, and not the least of which was participating in the built 4 times a year, giving trends 3 times a year, and working on the actual curriculum alignment once a year, but also working with students from the standpoint of one-on-one mentoring, working with students from the standpoint of presenting, coming to the campuses across the nation to actually present to a classroom full of individuals. And then they listed several other things. They, over time, have provided professional development for us for free, and they committed to continue to do that, and they do. It's not every single business every year that does that, but they do over time. So, you know, I think it's very strong for them, for a mature built, to have the one letter with multiple signatures. However, it didn't start that way. But it is a focus on commitment now. What are we doing? What's their understanding of what we're doing? Who are they? Why is it important? If you're talking about a company that does not have name recognition, it's very important to make sure that it's clear what that company does and why they care about your work. And then what are they committed to do?
Well, thank you, Ann. If I can chime in from our side here, in addition to the ones, the internships are tough because it really does involve a commitment from industry, and they are very valuable. Another thing that we've enjoyed the commitment for is subject matter expertise. So as we look at curriculum or program, is our program currently meeting industry needs? If you can get the time of one of their subject matter experts, let's say in digital manufacturing or some area like that, it can really enhance what you're doing. You can say, you know, this is vetted with this industry. You don't want to have a single company giving you their own opinion necessarily, but I think subject matter expertise is a great commitment. I'm just saying that from my own side as well. We talked a little bit about partnerships involving money. Marilyn, you made a comment. I thought I might elaborate on it a little bit. Although a partnership can involve money, in a grant application, you're right, you can't suggest that there's an in-kind contribution from a partner. That's no longer allowable as part of the budgeting process. But there may be other ways outside of the grant process itself that could work. Let's turn in the just a few minutes that we have left here. We don't have much time left, but here's the final question. Is breaking up hard to do? Marilyn, have you had to break up with a partner? Did you just let it wither on the vine, or did you do something active to say, you know, let's end our relationship here? Did you ever come across that instance, Marilyn?
Sure, several times, of course, but we operate primarily under the an idea that I coined as a coalition of the willing, and it takes a lot of work from our side, our organizational side, to keep the willing group growing. And as opportunities change and our direction and emphasis may shift slightly, some have weaned themselves out because the interest overlap is not really there. So I don't know that we've run into a case where we actually, quote, divorced someone, because we don't have those kinds of arrangements with any organizations, institutions, or organizations. But we have made conscious notation where conversation with organizations that say, you know, this isn't really working, we've gone a different path, we're on a different mission and shifted, and at least in some verbal communication acknowledged that and made a kind of a clean cut. In other cases, we've let them just drift away. So I think that could depend on the actual partnership and perhaps the exact person who you're working with or persons that you're working with who may have changed either their jobs or their own emphasis within the company.
That's a good point. If I could editorialize here a little bit on my own, hearing I'm answering my own question. We allow substitutions. For example, as you say, people change or maybe their structure changes, and we make it clear from the front on a front end of this that, sure, it's okay to have a substitution. We want the commitment from the company. We'd rather have a substitution than you not showing or not being part of it is the idea. Let's turn to another audience question before we wrap up today. Now a partner has committed to you either a letter or MOU form. What if they don't do it? And what if they don't do the things? Can you hold their feet to the fire, or do you have to break up, or what?
Of course.
Have you had experience there?
Oh, yes, and it's not pleasant. How many breakups have you ever had that were pleasant? Yeah. We've gone to quote-unquote counseling before to come to a new approach. Again, it's not so much in working with the businesses, it's working with the actual partners that get sub-awards. That's why it's very, very important to have a statement of work with each of those sub-award MOUs that says you will do this, 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 and this in order to get the budget that you have asked for. And oh yeah, we've had a partner who just never showed up for anything but wanted the money. That didn't last. We negotiated with that person. We went to that person's boss and that person's boss's boss and tried to work it out. We finally got a different person on that at that college that we could work with. and that did work out. So we didn't break up with the college, we broke up with the individual. But we have actually had a situation where one of our partners was a very small college and they only had one person for us to be able to work with, and it just did not work out. Sometimes people can be, quote, partners. We throw that word around a lot, but sometimes they can be partners without an SOW and they're stellar, but with an SOW and with money coming their way, it was just really difficult. Could not get the work done. So yeah, we had to eliminate that entire college and say, you're welcome to be involved in our work, but you won't get money from us anymore. You know, let's face it, it's taxpayer money. We have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that that money is well spent and that the government, NSF, we get value for money spent. And yes, it's very, very hard. Interestingly enough, on subawards, it's up to the prime institution to manage those, to ensure that they're working, to ensure that the partner is producing what they're supposed to produce. And if they're not, to negotiate a solution that works for both sides. If in fact it can be, it's always nice to substitute something that also works. But if it can't be, breaking up is hard to do, but very necessary.
You know, thank you, Ann. That's a perfect way. As you notice, folks, we're right at the top of our time today. We've had a great discussion. I've learned a lot just from listening to the back and forth between our presenters, and we appreciate the questions that have come in by email and in the question window today. So today we covered, as you see, how to approach that partnership from the beginning, how to evidence that partnership through either letters or memoranda, examples of partnership, and finally, what to do if things don't work out. That's always important to consider. I know I tend to learn a lot from don't do what I do, or what I did rather. So I've learned some things today. Colleagues, I wanted to thank you for joining, but let me just remind you of what's coming up. And in fact, it's coming up pretty quickly. Let me just go here. Our webinars, as you know, start at 3 p.m. Eastern. And on the slide, it says the last webinar of our 4-part series on creating proposals is on April 20th, and interestingly enough, called Final Tips for a Competitive Proposal. And there will be one of these Q&A sessions on April 27th following that up. You know where to find us, atecenters.org/CCTA, the Centers Collaborative for Technical Assistance. Ann, Elaine, Marilyn, thank you for taking your time out and joining in the discussion. We really appreciate it. Thank you, participants, for you taking your time and being part of this as well. That concludes our webinar for today. As I mentioned, this will be recorded and we'll send out that recording link. Goodbye, everyone.